This is the companion video for Chapter 3, Ambient Sounds and Basic Sound Cues. I'm going to be doing some demonstrations with how to implement sound cues, and we'll also go over how to implement a trigger sound. So make sure that you do read through the chapter before you begin this so that you have an understanding of ambient sounds and have a good sense of where we're going with this. But we're going to step through setting up our sound effects using sound cues rather than just placing them in the environment. I'll also go over the environment in here at the end of the video and talk a little bit about the assignment associated with this one. I have already put in a couple of sounds, just some basic sounds that are going to fit part of this environment. And if you need to review how to do that, go back to the previous chapter. So we're just going to kind of start in with creating some sound cues, and then after that we will do the trigger. And I'm going to work in this specific environment, the one that looks kind of like a retro library, and I have some sounds picked out. And from before, the way that we did it was we just kind of grabbed a sound, dropped it in, and called it a day. We came over here and we turned on our attenuation, and we might have adjusted it some, and we can always test this out by going to settings and turning up our real-time audio if you don't want to have to play, hit play and run through it. We can always test out a lot of our sounds in here. So first thing with this is supposed to be like an AC sort of noise, and if we hit play, you should be able to hear it. Oh wait, hold on, sorry. I think my desktop audio is off. Let's try this again. There you go. You should be able to hear it now. And the downside of this is that by default, these aren't looping sounds. And we can go into the settings and change them to looping sounds, but that's not really a good way to work. This AC is also only a couple seconds long, because if you remember, we don't have a lot of space for our sound effects usually. And being able to create sound cues, for one, we can put in much smaller sized sounds, and we can even make a lot of variation using sound cues. So it sounds like we have a lot more sounds in here than we actually do. As you can see, all of these sounds are really sort of short. So I have this couple second AC sound. I have this computer on sound. I'm going to use that in my trigger. So we're not going to use that one quite yet. I have a turn page 1. I have a turn page 2. And I have a type 1 and a type 2. And we're going to use all of these in our sound cue to make it sound a lot more interesting in this environment than what we could get with just dropping in a super long, super high memory sized ambient sound. So first things first, I would recommend maybe creating a new folder to hold all your sound cues. If you're kind of doing a small project though, you could probably just put them right in your sound effects folder. And to create one, we're just going to right click, go to sounds, and choose sound cue. And it's this one that looks like a little speaker. And it looks like this. We do want to give it a name. I'm just going to call this one like Library Ambient. And let me make sure that I delete this one out of here because we don't want to have that one in there. I'm then going to double click on my sound cue to open up the sound cue editor. And this is what it looks like. It's like a node-based sort of system. And this is really easy to use. They really Epic, designed this pretty well that we can drop in some sound effects. We use the palette over here to do some effects on it, and we can modify those effects over here in the details panel. I'm not going to go through all the effects today, but I do recommend that you kind of play around with some of these. But I'm going to point out some of the really useful ones. And as we go on, you're going to see how complex these things can get. And we can have a lot of fun with them. So first things first, Let me just drag that AC sound and drop it in here. Make sure you're kind of you're clicking on the title of that, not like the sound itself, like the little thumbnail that doesn't really work. So first things first, let's just make this AC sound loop. And we can do that by using this looping node over here. So we have our sound effects on the left, we have our palette nodes in the middle, and then we have to hook them up to the output. The output is what we would hear when we place this in the level. So let me hook this up to here. I'm just clicking and dragging and hooking it up to the output. If I select the looping node, we do have the options to alter this. By default, it is set to loop indefinitely, and that's probably what we want in this area. So, you know, if we want to try this out, we can play the whole cue, or we can just play a node if you kind of want to see what the nodes are doing individually. But this isn't very complex, so we can just hit play cue, and we can hear it. The fun thing too about playing it in the sound cue is we get these orange lines, and we can see the path that the sound is taking through our nodes. Again, not a complex one, but as we get more complex, this is really useful to see what is actually playing to our output. If we want to use this in our level, and we can do that real quick, we can place this in our environment. We do need to make sure we hit save. We can tell that we haven't saved it yet because we have this little asterisk next to it. We'll come back to this in a minute to make this a little bit more complex, but for now, let's just place this in the level. This should just be some review from last week. So I'm just going to move this off to the side for now. To place your sound cues, it's the same as placing just the regular old sounds. We just drag it and drop it in our environment. And right away, we should be able to hear it because I do have my real-time audio on. If you want to turn that off, we can just slide that off. And we do want to make sure that we're setting this up well. And since this is kind of like the ambient of the whole entire environment, we do want it to only be in this space. We don't want to hear, for instance, our library sounds when we go over to the dystopian urban slum. Like that wouldn't really make much sense. So I'm going to come over to the attenuation. And even though we don't ultimately want spatialization, and I'll talk about that in a second, we do need to have that checked on. But we do need to turn on override attenuation. We then have the ability to kind of fit this to our space. We kind of close up some of these. We come down to this attenuation distance. For this space, it might actually work a little bit better to work with the box shape, since we do want it to kind of fit to just this one single alcove. So I can add the box shape and then adjust the size of it. Let's see. We're going to have to really affect that fall off distance. It's really huge. If we kind of pull out, we can see how giant that fall off distance is. So I'm going to lower that considerably since we do only want it to be in our alcove. So let's see, let's get this placed. And I do kind of want to make sure it's fit into my spot. I only want it to be full volume inside of this actual space. So let me kind of adjust this a little bit better. We do want to make sure we're going a little bit above and below. It's probably good there. And let's make it tall. Because we want to make sure that the player is always inside of that. It would sound kind of weird if you had it at like chest level and then jumped and the sound was suddenly a little bit quieter. That wouldn't make much sense. Okay, let's see. There we go. Let's adjust that fall off distance. Let's go. We'll make it a little bit smaller. It's kind of acting a little straight. Oh, it's because my Z is negative by accident. Let's try that. Go in the right direction. That's better. Sorry about that. Let's make this smaller. We just don't want it going into the other rooms. And that should be pretty good. Move this out a little bit. And it looks like we're good to go. So now, if we turn this back on, since if we start in this alcove over here, we shouldn't be able to hear it, since our attenuation is set with our fall off. So let's turn this back on. And let's walk into our area. So it's full in here, and as we exit out, it kind of gets quieter. And that is what we want. So the other thing with ambient, and you really have to think about it, you know, is that when we have sounds like AC sounds, we probably really don't want that spatialized, because what spatialization is that's Unreal figuring out the stereo-ness of the sound. So and it plays from where our sound cue is in the scene. So if we have spatialization on, it's going to sound like this, and all of this library ambient is coming from this spot right in the middle of the room. And that really wouldn't make much sense, because we're also going to add some other sounds like turning pages and typing. And we kind of just want that to have like a general sort of ambience around that's not necessarily coming from a particular spot. So things like AC sounds, wind blowing, things that just kind of envelop you and you really wouldn't hear it coming from a specific point in space. You really want to turn your spatialization off. We don't do that here. We have to do that down here with the attenuation spatialization. Just turn off enable spatialization so that we don't get that specific point in space, because that really doesn't make sense. We want to save spatialization for sounds that should sound like they're coming from a particular spot, such as our, we're going to have one for the computer. So it's going to sound like sounds are coming directly from the computer. What else? You know, don't think that ambient sounds should never be spatialized. Just keep in mind that you might have to, you know, separate out your ambience. So like, for instance, if we had an exterior space and you wanted some like birds chirping from the trees, like you're in like an opening with some trees around, you want birds chirping, you want some wind sounds, maybe you have an ocean off in the distance and you want to hear like waves coming. You'd probably want one sound cue for like your wind, because wind shouldn't be spatialized, and that could just envelop most of your environment. You then probably would want a different ambient of your birds chirping, and that you probably would potentially want to be spatialized, like if they're supposed to come from a specific spot in the level. So you could put spatialization on there, and then, you know, put it around in various trees, like have smaller ones. If you have like an ocean, you might want to have that kind of off in the distance so that, you know, maybe you never actually reach it, but as you get kind of closer towards it, it gets louder, so that you would want spatialized, but you'd want to have that, you know, its own separate thing too. Okay, so we have this going, and I want to add those turn pages to that. So it just kind of sounds like you're in a library environment, and every once in a while you hear, you know, someone turning pages as if they're reading a book. And we're going to kind of keep this one, you know, not spatialized. It just kind of envelops you. It's coming from all around you. So back to my sound cue. I'm going to add in my 2 turn pages. And what we could do is, you know, if we don't loop these, they're going to only play once. And we probably kind of want them to play multiple times. So what we can do with this is we can use a different node called the, let's see, where is that? We don't want to do the mixer. We want to do the random. And what this will do is we can put multiple sounds in here. So like we could put the turn page 1, and we could put the turn page 2. And if you have more than 2, you know, usually you might want like multiple, so you're not doing the same 2 over and over again. You can just click the add input to add to that. We could throw this into our output just temporarily and watch what happens if we do this one. So we play our cue. It's going to randomly choose one. But, you know, it kind of only plays at once. So we can then add our looping onto here. And it's just going to kind of keep playing one or the other. Usually looping, you kind of put towards the end of things so that, notice like we didn't have to put a looping on each of these. We can just put it on the end of this random and it just kind of keeps playing the whole thing over and over again. Kind of obnoxious though, isn't it? Like this would not be what you'd want to hear in a game. So the next node that can be super useful, and you should be using it a lot, especially for like these little kind of accent noises, is the delay node. And with the delay node, what this does is it will put a random delay between, you know, when this actually fires. So, you know, we can select this one and we can put a minimum and maximum. And this you might just kind of need to play with a little bit. So like, let's say our minimum is 0.5 and these are in seconds. And let's say our maximum is 3 seconds. So it's going to delay anywhere between half a second to 3 seconds. And then if we play our cue again, we can see that we're getting a little bit more variation, like it's not the same sort of thing over and over. Now, they are kind of the same sounds, and that can also get a little bit repetitive. So another node that we could throw on would be the modulator node. There's a lot of other nodes in here that can also do stuff like that. And but the modulator one is kind of like the easiest one to kind of get some variation. I'm just going to hook this up into the random and then go into the delay. And what the modulator does is it will change the pitch min and max and the volume min and max. And if you kind of remember, you know, volume is how loud it is, or pitch is, you know, is it a high pitch or a low pitch? So we can actually change, and I'm gonna make this extreme. Like usually you don't want to probably do it like this, but when you're kind of playing around with notes, sometimes it can be kind of fun to do that. So let's just listen and see what this sounds like. We'll play the whole cue. Let's go. Actually, let me fix this delay so it's a little bit quicker, just so we can kind of hear the modulator a little bit better. So you can hear that it's kind of changing that pitch. So you are kind of getting a little bit more variation. And it's kind of neat that we're getting all of these unique sounds out of 2 sounds. Again, we don't really want to have irritating sounds. So once we kind of get this set, we probably want to fix that delay. And honestly, we probably shouldn't be hearing that sound all that much. So I'm probably going to change like the min and max to like 1 second and then 5 seconds so that we don't hear it too often. When you start hearing those little noises too often, it does get irritating, and it does kind of break that illusion of realism. And so now if we just hear it every once in a while, it's going to sound more realistic. Okay, so we have our turning pages, but we need to add that into our air conditioner sound. So the node that we can use for this one is called the mixer node. And there's kind of 2, or I guess maybe 3 different types of nodes that you can use to kind of combine sound effects together. We use the random, which you feed various different single wave files in, and it'll randomly choose one to play. The other one that's kind of similar to random is going to be the concatenator node. And the way that this works is that And let me kind of just demonstrate this real quick. We'll feed those in, feed that into the looping, and then feed that out. And you can kind of see what it's going to do when we play this whole cue. It will just cycle through all of the nodes, you know, all of these in order. If you remember from programming, we use the word concatenate in programming when we were talking about strings. When you concatenate strings together, it just means you put one after the other. The concatenator node will play one sound effect after the other in the order that you put them in. And you can add more, you know, don't think you're stuck to 2. You can add more inputs. But, you know, think about, do you want to concatenate, or are you trying to do your random node? So random, concatenate. The other one is the mixer. And the difference is rather than playing one after the other, the mixer will play all of your inputs at the same time. So we put in our AC, and then we'll feed in our random page turning, and then we'll output that to the output. And let's see how, as we organize this a little bit better so we can see some stuff. And let's play this cue. So that AC is always going to be playing since we have that looping on there. And you do hear a little bit of a blip, and that just sometimes happens. As long as you do your best, it's just something that happens in Unreal sometimes. And I'm not going to take any points off as long as you made your best attempt at making a sound that can loop in Audition. So don't worry about that little blip you hear. But this is where having the orange lines is kind of neat, so you can actually see how it's feeding into the output. This is playing consistently. This plays every once in a while. So I'm going to stop this, make sure I save it, and hop back over to our actual level. And let me make sure that my sounds are on. And let's go in. Let's see, why isn't this playing? Sorry. Sometimes they get a little weird. Is it playing? Hold on. Sometimes if your sounds don't play, you might have to make sure that auto activate is turned on. There we go. I didn't do the best that I could to try to make that, for the sake of time, I didn't do the best I could to make that sound looping, so you can usually get a little bit closer than that. But like I said, every once in a while, you will hear that little bit of a blip, and that's fine for our purposes. And there's other ways that you could kind of fix stuff like that. Excuse me. For instance, if we wanted to kind of work on that a little bit more, let me mute that for a second. If we go back to our ambient sound, we could actually feed two different, like if you found two different air conditioner volume, like sounds, that works kind of the best. But I'm going to put this on here, 2 of them. I am going to mix them. I'll put 1 in here, but I'm going to put a delay on this one of like 0.1 seconds or 0.2 seconds because it's not a very long, maybe 0.5 seconds, sorry. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Let's put a delay on here and feed that into here. But this delay will be 0.5, and if you put the same for both min and max, it'll just play. Always do that one. So we're playing the same AC sound, but one is delayed by half a second. We'll throw that in there. If we play that cue. Oh wait, so sorry about that. Let's see. That's not what I want. I mean, it kind of fixes it. Shoot, I'd have to, I think I have them in the wrong order. for a second. Let's see. I think I have the looping and the delay in the wrong order, but that should be okay. I'd have to play around with this a little bit more, but you kind of see where it's going. If you want to figure out how to do that better, what if I just turn it on here? I don't want to waste too much more time, but hey, maybe that'll be a good challenge. I know there's a way to do it with using like the delay on one of these, but it's just a way, you know, if you kind of start layering some stuff, you can kind of hide issues like that. So, you know, consider that if it's really bothering you. We want to try to minimize it as much as possible by doing those kind of things, but you'll still get a little bit of a blip. So let me actually walk over. Oh no, I'm losing control. Let me make sure I save this. Save all. Yeah, don't forget, you know, we're working in Unreal. Don't forget to save often. There we go. So let's see if I walk in here. If I walk out, we hear it fade out, so that when I go to my other areas, we don't hear that. All right, so that's just a little bit with that. Let me make one more real quick, just for another quick demo. I want to do some typing, and you know, this isn't going to be our trigger. The trigger one is going to be actually this computer on sound, but let's just make another quick one with those typing sounds. So sounds. Sound cue. And I'm going to call this one typing. And this is just going to be a really simple one where we just hear some typing sounds every once in a while, kind of like the page turn. But this one we're actually going to keep spatialized. We're going to make sure that it sounds like it's coming from the computer. So let's do a couple things. We can always do these sounds in different orders, like the nodes. Like we can have unique modulators on each of these. So like if we wanted to have different kinds of pitch or volume min and max, don't think you always have to have it on at the end. Like what if this one really, let's see, let's put that node. Let's try this one. That sounds good. And then we'll throw in our random. And we definitely probably want a delay on this. So we're not getting that all at once. Actually, let's be a little bit more complicated. This one we probably don't want to hear very often, right? But this one kind of sounds like someone's typing. So let's actually do this. Let's, rather than that, let's do a concatenate. Where's my concatenator? And we want to make sure that we are at least getting 3 hits if this one gets chosen. Let's hear what this sounds like. It's going to be a little bit much, but it's a good place to start. Oops. Yep, what did I forget? I forgot to put in my looping node. Let's throw that in real quick. All right, there we go. All right, so it's working the way we want. It's just kind of obnoxious. And we definitely don't want obnoxious sounds. So what I'm going to do is put in my delay here. Let's put in our delay. And we're going to make this a delay min of, let's do 0.5 and a delay max of 5. So either a half a second delay or up to a 5-second delay. Let's play this cue again. And we really don't want to hear these sounds necessarily all the time. We don't want to sound like we're in like some kind of crazy office where everyone's typing all at once. It's just someone kind of casually browsing on the computer, doing some work, you know, reading the internet or something. So we don't want it to be overly noisy. And this is going to work. So let's just save this. And we're going to drop this in our level. And since we want it to actually be spatialized to the computer, we are going to place it near the computer. And we'll make our adjustments so that it actually sounds like it's coming from our computer. So place it in, locate our attenuation, and we need to have both of these checked on, allow spatialization and override attenuation. And we will come down and affect this stuff, and you know, the sphere is probably fine for this. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. So let's make it a little bit smaller though. So maybe it's at full volume when we're right on that computer, and our fall off will be about that big. Because again, we don't want to go in the other room. And you know, computer typing noises aren't that loud. The other thing, let's make sure that auto activate is turned on, and we can actually just test this out by turning this up again. So we should hear it out here as we go in. We hear our typing sounds, and we do want to make sure that we leave spatialization turned on. And it's going to be really hard to hear it in this video probably, but if you had headphones on and you were kind of turning side to side, you would be able to hear it coming from like one ear and then coming from the other ear. So it's kind of neat how it does that. Okay, so hopefully you're kind of comfortable with sound cues. The next part is going to be setting up our triggers. So let me turn this off real quick. And it's always just a good habit to get into of using sound cues for everything. So even though this is like a singular sound, I am going to still create a sound cue for it. Oh, computer cue, we'll call it. It doesn't like computer on, so it's the same thing. It makes it easier to loop. It makes, you know, once you get more familiar with these, we could do stuff with like changing the volume of it. It's going to be a really simple one. We don't want this to loop because we just want it to play once. So if we play our node, or I'm sorry, our cue, we have this, we're going to pretend this is going to be for like a computer on sort of sound. Okay, so saved, good to go. So the next part is actually setting up the trigger, and we're going to do this using some blueprinting. It's not too bad, but we're going to first set up our trigger, and then we'll do our blueprint. So we need to use we're going to use a box trigger for this, and we locate that over here. If you don't have basic selected, make sure you click basic, and we're going to use this box trigger, and we're going to just click and drag it, and we want to place this in the scene where if we walk up and we encounter it, it's going to play a sound. So we're going to place it. We're then going to adjust the size of it over in the details. You know, we don't want it to take up the whole area because we just want it to be where this should trigger, and that should just be when you walk up to the computer. So let's make sure this is also tall enough. We should probably give this a better name too. Don't call it just trigger box. We'll call it computer trigger. And we'll make sure that we have it so that if we walk into this area, it's going to play a sound. Our computer on sound, as if you walked up to it. So the other important thing is once you have your trigger, you actually have to place your sound cue that you want to play in the environment. And we also need to set that up correctly as far as like, you know, its attenuation, its spatialization, and all that stuff. So don't forget that step. Place your box trigger and then place your sound cue. And we want it to come from the computer, so it's going to be, you know, right here too. So we have this here. We need to make sure we turn all of this on because we don't want it to play through the whole level. And we can adjust the size of this. You know, we're going to be right on it. But, you know, if we walk away as it's playing, we don't want it to be, you know, same volume. That's kind of like the whole point is once we trigger it, if we move away from it, it's going to get quieter as the attenuation takes effect. So maybe make the fall off bigger. It's going to be a little bit louder. But that should be pretty good. That's also why it's kind of neat. The other thing you probably want to do is we want to make sure that underneath the activation auto activate, we turn it off. Otherwise, when you hit play, it's going to automatically play at least once. You know, it's not looping, so it's only going to play once. But if you ever end up having issues with, you've set up some trigger sounds, and when you first start the level, you hear a bunch of them because you didn't, for one thing, set up your attenuation. It's because this is turned on, and you want to just turn auto activate off. So once we have that set, we should be good to go as far as doing our blueprints. And I know there's multiple ways to do blueprints. And if you want to set, you know, if you're doing your own projects and you want to set them up a little bit differently, feel free. But for this class, unless specified otherwise, I want you to put all of your blueprints like this inside of the level blueprint. This way, you know, if we move this level around, it'll come with it. And it's just a nice, easy way to contain all of the blueprints to make it easier to see. So unless stated otherwise, I know that you probably would want to actually set this up differently if you're doing a game. But for this course, you have to put your blueprints in the level blueprint, especially since we're going to have to show off everything with a video. Once we start having multiple blueprints in, you know, your levels, it's going to be easier just to contain them all in there so that you can show them better. So once you're ready to go with your blueprints, we're going to go underneath the blueprints, open level blueprints. And this is where you need to put them, the level blueprint. So first things first, we just kind of want to set this up, like if we kind of think logically what this is going to be. When you collide with that trigger box, we're going to play the sound that we placed in the level. So what we need to do, we need to, and it's going to get kind of crowded. It's a little bit easier if you have dual screens, but I'm going to try my best. I'm going to select my trigger box. I'm then going to come back to my blueprint. And I'm going to right click, and I am going to choose add event for computer trigger. And I want a collision event, and I want an on actor begin overlap. So this is going to happen when the player walks into it. We know that it's the correct one because it should put, you know, whatever we named that right there. Next, we want to put a reference to the sound in here. So make sure that you find the correct sound. And let's see, is it computer cue? Nope, it's computer cue. So we're going to select our sound. And then we're going to go back to our blueprint and right click. And we want to create a reference to that computer cue. So it's right here. If you can't find these, make sure, sometimes, click context sensitive needs to be on to show it. So we're going to choose that one. And then all we need to do is now tell it that when this begins on actor overlap, we want to play the sound. So we're going to pull a new action from here. Actually, hold on, before I start that, let me make this a little bit bigger. Since we got our references, we don't really need to look at that right now. I'm going to pull this out, and I am going to start typing play. And sometimes context sensitive, if you turn that off, like if we can't quite find that, you might need to do that. And what we're looking for is play audio component. So let's see, maybe it needs to be on. So audio, where is that? No, it's not there. Let's see. Audio, not notifications. See if I can find it. Game. Play. Sorry, sometimes these are a little bit hard to find. Let's see. Play. Kind of close up some of these. Maybe I'll find it easier. Okay, I found it. Okay, so in order to find it, it's a little bit, there's a lot of plays in there. So we pull it off, turn context sensitive off, and start typing play, and then start typing audio. And you should be able, it's audio components audio. We want this play. It should be start a sound playing on an audio component. Target is audio component. So play audio, turn off context sensitive, and it's in right here. So we want to do this one. And what we want to do is we want to put this computer cue into the target. And it is going to pop open this extra thing. And that's fine. And I believe that's it. So we should be good to go. We need to make sure this compiles. We need to make sure it saves. And the as you test, I would recommend kind of keeping this open. Unfortunately, we can't test this, in our regular, this thing, since we actually need the player to run into it. So I'm going to kind of keep this to the side. It's kind of nice to keep this open. Again, if you have multiple monitors, definitely keep this open as you test this out. So let me make sure everything's saved. And let's walk over. And we're kind of keeping an eye on that level blueprints. Let's see. And it works. So if we walk back out, every time we run into that, it should play. And that's the end of that. So very simple. We're going to be doing a lot of blueprints. You could do a lot of really fun stuff with audio and blueprints. So this is gonna come up again and again. So make sure that you are comfortable with this. So we're starting off real simple, but again, do keep it in your level blueprints so these are easier to find. As far as the assignment for this level goes, let me start at the beginning. If we look at what Blackboard says, and always, refer to Blackboard, you are given a script for ultimately submitting this, what you're supposed to video. So, and that's going to be a separate video. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to record these. But for this one, you have 4 different alcoves: a lounge or waiting room, a library, an exterior dystopian urban slum, and a dank cave. And you're going to have to create well, first you have to find your bass sounds, and you do have to use this website. And you're going to go to sound effects, and this is a good place for source sounds. And I do want you to only use source sounds found here. The reason is that there's a lot of websites out there that have a lot of free sound effects, but most of them are just garbage or some weird format, or just, they're not very good. And I don't want you to spend a lot of time hunting for the world's most perfect sound effect. Just use what's here. There's enough here. You're going to have to download them and look at them. You don't have to download every single one, but I would recommend just, this week start downloading some. Keep them on your computer. Next week, maybe download a little bit more if you need something. But there's plenty here to work with. And if you just can't find the world's most, the exact sound that you need, compromise and find something close enough. You can do, your editing that you need to in Audition as well, but we're not going to be doing what we did last week where, with for stuff like the coffee maker, where you were mixing multiple sounds in Audition, exporting one sound and placing that. We're done with that. Now you need to export out little tiny source sounds and mix them together using sound cues, because ultimately that's the way you need to be doing sound effects in Unreal. So download, get your source sounds, then bring them into here. Each one needs to sound different. Each soundscape needs to be contained to the specific alcove. I don't want to hear, your dank cave in the library. So make sure that you are doing that correctly. We want to work with a minimum, there's a minimum requirement. Let's see. You need 4 sounds for creating minimum 4 sounds for creating the ambient, and a minimum of 1 sound for the trigger sounds. So you do need to use, I don't want recycling of WAV files. So you're going to have a minimum of 5 sounds submitted to me. If you want to go more than 4 sounds for your ambient and 1 for the trigger, that's fine. But that is the minimum, is 4 unique per alcove for the ambient and 1 unique for the trigger. So make sure you are keeping a text file and tell me what pack and the name of the original source sound is, and you are submitting that with this. And that should just be a text file. That's a .txt file, not a Word doc. Open up Notepad or WordPad and just save it as a text so that it's a little bit easier to work with. And let's see what else about that. So make sure that you're thinking about ways to make each unique. But keep in mind, you are being graded on the quality. We don't want to make annoying sounds. And if you look at the rubric and you read through it, we're trying to make appealing sounds. And that is part of the grade. Technical is 50%. You did it well. Extra care was taken. Kind of like with the video stuff. If you do the bare minimum, it's going to be about a 75%. And you do need to make sure that you are placing them well. There's no dead spots. It's not annoying. And I'll tell you, the one big thing that students, the one downfall is making annoying sounds. And a lot of that comes to too much repetition, too quick of repetition, too loud, too obnoxious. So really work on that appeal of your sounds. I am going to be grading you on downsizing them correctly and, importing them correctly. So make sure you read over the requirements of this and go through that. But, this one's pretty straightforward. You have your lounge, you have your library, you have your urban slum, and you have your dank cave. So, go through and see what you got, and definitely think about it before you start implementing, and definitely start utilizing these sound cues, because that's what we're starting to look for. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your instructor, but look for another video on creating videos of your levels and submitting them.